One man,
Got it closed.
iron sights, no scope. And by the time the guns went quiet, the Red Army had a name for him that outlived the war itself. Belaya Smert, the White Death. They sent tanks, they sent artillery, they sent hundreds of men to hunt one farmer in a white coat, and the snow swallowed every one of them. By the end of this video, you'll know how a quiet Finnish hunter with a bolt-action rifle became the most feared name on the entire Winter War front, and why, even now, historians still argue about exactly how many men he killed, and what that number can never fully explain. Before he was a legend, before the Soviets whispered his name like a curse in the dark, before 340,000 square kilometers of frozen forest became his hunting ground, Simo Häyhä was just a farmer. Born in December of 1905 in the small village of Kiski near Finland's eastern border, a place of pine forests and frozen lakes where winter didn't visit, it ruled. Out here, you didn't learn to shoot for sport. You learned because a missed shot meant a hungry family. Every bullet had to count. By the time Hayha was a young man, he was already known in his village, not for anything loud, not for anything flashy, for something quieter. Precision. He was a hunter, a civil guard marksman, the kind of man who could read wind off a tree line the way other men read a newspaper. He served briefly in the Finnish military in the 1920s. Bicycle units, nothing glamorous. And here's the thing most people get wrong about him. He wasn't some elite, formally trained sniper waiting for his moment. Historians say he only got real sniper familiarization during a refresher course years later, in the summer of 1938. That's it. That's the resume. What he did have was thousands of hours alone in the woods, reading distance by eye, reading silence, knowing exactly how long to wait before you pull a trigger. He owned his own rifle, a Finnish M2830, nicknamed the Pistukorva, after the pointed ears of a Finnish dog breed. Iron sights, no scope, nothing but wood, steel, and a farmer's steady hands. He took that same rifle, his own rifle, to war, because in the winter of 1939, that quiet skill was about to be the only thing standing between his homeland and an army that outnumbered his country almost 10-1. Simo Häyhä didn't know it yet, but the forest was about to become a battlefield, and he was about to become something the history books still can't fully explain. November 30th, 1939. November 30th in the morning. Soviet artillery opens fire on Finnish border posts. No declaration of war, no warning, just the sky splitting open. Builds by 0920, air raid sirens are screaming over Helsinki. By 1330 that same day, Finland's president has handed full command of the armed forces to one man, Field Marshal Carl Gustaf Emil Mannerheim, and declared a state of war. Finland has hours, not days, to prepare for what's coming, and what's coming is almost unthinkable. On the Karelian Isthmus alone, the Soviet 7th Army rolls in with roughly 120,000 men, 900 guns and mortars, 1,400 tanks. Finland's covering forces on that same line, about 21,600 men, 71 guns, 29 anti-tank guns. Do the math for a second. That's not a battle. On paper, that's an execution. A nation of 3.5 million people staring down the largest military machine on Earth, an empire that assumed this war would be over in weeks. But here's what Stalin's generals didn't factor into their plan. They didn't factor in the terrain, endless forest, frozen lakes, narrow roads that turned Soviet columns into slow-moving targets. And they didn't factor in men like Simo Häyhä, Men who'd spent their entire lives learning how to survive, move, and kill in exactly this kind of cold, exactly this kind of silence. Within days, Hayha would be sent toward a quiet riverline north of Lake Ladoga, a place called Kollaa. Nobody outside Finland had heard of it yet. They were about to. Early December 1939. Hayha arrives at the Kollaa front, a narrow riverline north of Lake Ladoga, nothing more than trees, ice, and mud on a map. He's assigned to the 6th Company, Infantry Regiment 34, under Lieutenant Arne Jutilainen. Just another rifleman, for now. It doesn't take long for someone to notice. His commanders watch him shoot, really watch him, and realize this isn't ordinary marksmanship. He's ordered into a sniper role, not because he asked for it, because the Finnish army needed every advantage it could find, and Hayha was an advantage. And the kills start climbing, fast. In his own handwritten memoir, discovered decades later, Hayha wrote something chilling in its simplicity, that by a point before Christmas, his tally already stood at 150. One man, one rifle, no scope. Think about that number for a second. That's not a soldier holding a line. That's a one-man wall the Soviet army couldn't find a way through. But Hayha wasn't just shooting. He was disappearing, choosing a position, waiting, sometimes for hours, motionless, in temperatures that could freeze exposed skin in minutes, firing once and vanishing before the enemy even knew where the shot came from. The Soviets were about to learn they weren't fighting a sniper. They were fighting a ghost. Here's where it gets almost hard to believe. Hayha didn't just have a steady hand. He had a system, one so careful, so disciplined, it turned him into something the Soviets couldn't hunt back. Before firing, he'd pack down the snow in front of his position. Why? Because a rifle shot kicks up a visible puff of snow, a flag pointing straight at the shooter. Packing it down killed that signature. One less way to be found. He wore white, head to boots. Against the snow, at any real distance, he simply wasn't there. And after every shot, every single one, he moved, new position, new angle, never the same spot twice. Soviet spotters could stare at a tree line for hours and never find the man who'd just killed one of their own. Often, he wouldn't return to a position until after dark. Patience wasn't a virtue for Hayha. It was a weapon. And slowly, across the Soviet ranks, a name started spreading, half warning, half nightmare. Belaya Smert, the White Death. Soldiers who'd survived Kollaa started refusing to move in the open. Officers who'd survived Kollaa started avoiding it altogether. One man, a bolt-action rifle, no scope, and an entire army beginning to fear the empty, silent tree line more than they feared each other's artillery. February 17th, 1940. By now, Hayha's reputation has climbed all the way up the Finnish chain of command. Colonel Antero Svensson, commander of the 12th Division, stands before him and presents him with an honorary rifle, a gift from a Swedish businessman who'd heard the stories all the way from Sweden. The official record from that day states something staggering. 219 confirmed kills with his Pistikorva rifle alone, roughly the same number again with a submachine gun. 2 different weapons, 2 brutal tallies, 1 man. Now, here's where we have to be honest with you, because Hayha's own memoir, written later that same year, claims a far higher number, somewhere around 500 by war's end. Other traditional accounts push even higher, toward 542. Which number is real? Even historians today can't fully agree. And honestly, if you're the kind of person who gets pulled into stories like this, stories about what people are actually capable of under pressure, do us a favor. and hit that like button. It genuinely helps more of these true stories reach people who'd want to hear them. Now, back to the ice. What's confirmed, verified, documented, sits well over 200. What's legend, what's added by decades of retelling, that's harder to pin down. But even the most conservative, most skeptical number still makes him one of the deadliest snipers to ever pick up a rifle. And on the Kollaa front, the fighting isn't slowing down. It's about to get far worse for everyone, including Hayha himself. March 6th, 1940. 9 days before the war would end, Hayha is out in the forest near Kollaa, doing what he's done for months: hunting, moving, engaging the enemy at close range. Now, and here's the part that surprises people. It wasn't a rival sniper who finally got him. Finnish historical accounts say it was an ordinary infantryman, 30 to 40 meters out, firing an explosive round that struck him directly in the jaw. No warning shot from a distant tree line, no duel between two master marksmen, just a close, brutal, almost random moment of violence, the kind war deals out to everyone eventually, no matter how careful you are. In his own memoir, Hayha described waking up minutes later, already surrounded, his comrades turning him over, bandaging a wound that should have killed him outright. The Pistukorva rifle he'd carried since before the war fell silent for good that day. Somewhere between 100 and 542 men, depending on which record you trust. And it took a single explosive round, fired by a man who probably never even knew whose face he'd just hit. The ghost in the snow had finally been found. But the story wasn't over yet. It was about to become something else entirely. A story about what survival actually costs. What followed wasn't glory. It was pain. Hayha's jaw wound was catastrophic. Finnish reporting states he endured 26 separate surgeries just to survive and rebuild his face. 26 times, under the knife, while the war that made him a legend ground on without him. 7 days after he fell, on March 13th, 1940, the Moscow Peace Treaty ended the Winter War. Fighting stopped at 11 in the morning. Hayha wasn't on the front to see it. He was in a hospital bed, fighting a much smaller, much more personal war. That August, while he was still recovering, Field Marshal Mannerheim himself promoted him, straight from junior NCO to officer rank. A year later, he was nominated for Finland's highest military honor, the Mannerheim Cross. He never received it. The most feared man in the Winter War came home not as a triumphant hero paraded through the streets, but as a quiet, badly scarred farmer, learning to speak again. Simo Häyhä went back to what he'd always been: a hunter, a farmer. He lived quietly for another 6 decades, largely out of the public eye, in the country he'd nearly died defending. He died on April 1st, 2002, at 96 years old, and was buried in Ruokolahti, not far from the border he once held alone. Historians still debate his exact kill count today: 219 confirmed by his own commanders, 500 by his own memoir, 542 by tradition and legend. The truth probably sits somewhere in that gap, and honestly, it almost doesn't matter which number is exact, because the real story was never really about a number. It was about a quiet man who understood patience, discipline, and his own small corner of frozen earth better than anyone alive, and who, when his country needed him most, simply refused to be found, the ghost in the snow. Simo Häyhä never wanted to be a legend. He just wanted to protect his home, and in doing that, he became one of the most feared names in the history of modern warfare, using nothing but a rifle, the cold, and a lifetime of patience. If this story hit you the way it hit us, you need to see the pilot who survived war, sharks, prison, and his own mind, the story of Louis Zamperini, coming up next. Another true story of one person pushed past every limit anyone thought was possible. And if you want more stories like this one, true events, told the way they deserve to be told, hit subscribe to Valor Untold Stories. There's more waiting for you.